The Craig Griffin Universe.
It's that old story. What's the best way to eat an elephant? Like one piece at a time. I'm a classic.
Ideally not to eat one at
True.
all.
Yeah, don't eat elephants.
No.
Note to everyone: do not eat elephants. Yep. But it's such a great saying in that it's breaking things down into those small pieces. And look, I'm a classic for it. Of I tend to look at things very much big picture. And it can make things very easily to seem overwhelming. And it's a good reminder for everyone, myself especially, that it is important to just sometimes break those things down, look at the very next thing that's in front of you. And I know they teach, like the Special Forces guys, that sort of thing. Shout out to the Special Forces, be they in Australia or any of our allies, United States, Great Britain, any of our allies. But it's that thing of just focus on what's in front of you right here, right now, that next step. You hear the likes of like your Dave Goggins and, some of the Special Forces guys, and they're like, you're on a 300-kilometre march, with all the gear. Don't think about that 300 kilometres or 300 miles. Think about the next step, and then the next step after that, and then the next step after that. Think about the next 5 minutes and just getting through that, and then the next 10 minutes, and then the next hour, literally just the next step in the process. It's such a great lesson, and one, like I say, it's more of as much of a reminder to myself as anyone. It's that don't get overwhelmed, and it's easy to say, but it's just looking at the smaller steps and breaking it down, controlling the things that you can control, not focusing on the things that are beyond your control, and just going, what's right in front of me? What can I control in the here and now? Such a good lesson for everyone, really.
Yep. Definitely.
Yeah. So, I think that's a good point that, we look at of just not being overwhelmed by making things too big. And
Yep.
like you say, whether it's coaching in whatever form or doing whatever it is that you want to do, of just finding a way to make it. Sometimes we go, I don't want to be a coach, like you said, because I don't want to do public speaking, but there's so many different avenues and so many different ways of doing things, especially now, like with the internet and the ability to do things online. And now that we're such a certain way down the track when it comes to these things, they become so developed now with the advent of AI, and with a lot of apps where you don't actually have to know how to do a certain thing. You might decide, hey, I want to do this thing, and there's apps that can do all the legwork for you. It's such a great time. It provides such great opportunity, to just to be able to do those things. And I say that, like, it's great to remind ourselves, but it's also a good lesson for anyone that's listening, that there's just so much opportunity there. Sometimes we may not see it. Sometimes it's like, yourself, sometimes you do one thing and it leads to another thing, to another thing, to another thing, like just us being here right now is a classic example of it, in that I'd started off as an actor, wanting to be an actor, and like I was never great. I loved it, had a ball, learnt so much professionally, but about myself, the Socrates thing of know thyself, learnt so much about myself. And then like the acting led to like the voice acting and voiceover work, which in a roundabout kind of a way has then led me back to this. And this is the podcasting. This is not even the first episode. This is literally the pilot. This is us having a taste of it. But, this is something that I really want to do. Something, coming back to talking about the things that you want to do. This is something I'm super passionate about and really want to give a red hot go at, something that I'm going to love doing, but something that I probably wouldn't have just gone, hey, I want to be a podcaster. I want to do podcasting. But steps.
Yeah, well, I mean, podcasting's a relatively newish thing as well. So, I mean, it was never something we thought about. I mean, it was people talking on YouTube or, you know, those sorts of things. You know, podcasting's a whole new thing all on its own. So
Yeah. I'm actually halfway through writing down something at the moment that talks about kind of my journey into podcasting, and this is perhaps might be a good point to raise, in that probably more so when I was younger, I absolutely loved the idea of being a radio announcer, you know, and big shout out to, you know, someone I'm a big fan of, Mick Malloy, you know, who, for anyone international, is a famous Australian entertainer, comedian, actor, you know,
DJ, host.
Yeah. Like, you know, jack of all trades. It's done a little bit of everything.
Football.
Yeah, that's it. Still has his own show on the front bar and, you know, those sort of things. But, you know, I grew up watching him. Like, shout out to the early shows. The D-Generation, you know, that then became The Late Show, became The Panel, you know, awesome shows of the 90s, which then they became Working Dog Productions, which most people would know them for, you know, The Castle, The Dish, you know, those kinds of things. But the point being that, you know, Mick Malloy had a show with him, and this is what I've, you know, started writing about. Him and Tony Martin had their own show, Martin Malloy.
Yep.
Famous radio show, you know, back in the day, back in the 90s, I think 90s going into the noughties, into the early 2000s. Yep. But I can remember, because I, you know, primarily being such a big fan of Mick Malloy, another great guy to have on the show down the track. So putting that out there, shout out Mick Malloy if you end up hearing this, or if someone knows you.
Yep, get in touch.
Hit me up. I'd love to have Mick on the show. But, you know, I remember watching him in his show and just going, I'd love to do that. Like, you know, that natural banter, that ability to just tell stories and tell yarns, to entertain people first and foremost, but to, you know, to educate and inform as well as entertain. Such a great thing. He ended up doing the same thing, jump forward to more recent times. So, they finished up a couple of years ago, but Mick Malloy and Jane Kennedy, again, who goes back to the early days of the D-Generation. They were all basically, like, they all went to the same university together. They were doing, like, you know, university shows, you know, university reviews, that kind of thing, which is pretty much how they started. And I've heard them talk and say about how their only real goal was to primarily make each other laugh and to entertain themselves. And then if someone else got a laugh out of it as well, happy days. And, you know, they've been arguably one of the most successful teams in the history of Australian entertainment to actually do exactly that. You know, it's then spun off into other shows, you know, Utopia and all of the other things that they've spun off into. You know, and even if they've sort of gone off and done their own things, they've had each other as guests on the show. You know, the Martin Malloy show, as I said later, became the Kennedy the Kennedy Malloy show on Triple M radio, you know, doing exactly the same thing, entertaining people, informing, educating, you know, just telling stories, letting other people tell their stories, and just that banter, you know. And just, I remember, again, just going, I'd love to do that. Like, that's what I would love to do. And then was fortunate enough to have a little bit of time working in, you know, just unpaid, working in community radio, as you know, and doing some radio work there, which, you know, it wasn't the same thing.
No.
It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but, you know, like,
gave you a taste.
100%.
An insight into something that you would never have had a opportunity to do.
100%, yeah. Shout out to 4CRB. Still on the Gold Coast radio station, still going. You know, a lot of great people there. You know, I was doing that right up, you know, until like 2019, pre-COVID times. but which was the reason I had to stop doing it.
The border. Yeah.
But you know, the point there that I'm making in the long way around is that it's all kind of led to this. You know, in that, you know, it's step by step. It's provided me with the skills. You know, learning from acting training and then voice acting work. Massive shout out there to Gabrielle Rogers, who's actually going to be our very first guest on the show. Gabrielle Rogers will be, you know, show #001. But, you know, the things that I've learnt have all kind of, you know, led to me doing this, which I may or may not be successful at. Only time will tell, you know, and you know, it could go a long way, it could not, but again, you know, back to what you were saying, we'll give it a red hot go and we'll step up and see how it all goes. But this is, you know, I'm loving it. This is great. This is not even the first episode. This is the pilot, and I've had an absolute ball.
Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right?
Yeah. No guts, no glory, right?